Thank you all for coming out today. As I was driving here today, I was reflecting back, and I think actually this is my fourth time being at Jacob Edwards Library. So Margaret, thank you so very much for having me back again, and thank you for supporting local authors and for promoting local authors, because programs like this and audiences like you, this is what we live for. This is our bread and butter. I thrive on doing these kinds of programs. So thank you very much for the opportunity to come and share with you. And yes, today I'm going to talk about One Door Closes: Overcoming Adversity by Following Your Dreams. Now, my co-writer Jared Chrudimsky and I wrote One Door Closes in 2013. So this is the 10th anniversary of the publication of One Door Closes. And as you'll hear as I'm talking about the book, it's also, I'm celebrating another 10th anniversary this year that I'll talk about a little bit later. And there are some wonderful things that have happened since this book was published 10 years ago. Now, if you had told me 10 years ago that 10 years on I would be here again talking about One Door Closes, or that I would be anywhere talking about this book that's now a decade old, I would have laughed. I would have laughed because I knew at the time that this book was powerful. I knew that this book has a very important message, but for it to be still inspiring and motivating people 10 years later is absolutely phenomenal to me. What I'm going to do this afternoon is I'm going to tell you a little bit about how One Door Closes came to be and what the book is about. I'm going to read a little bit from One Door Closes so you can get a little sense of what is in the book. And then I'm going to talk to you about the wonderful things that have happened as a result of the publication of this book and how those things came about. So, as I mentioned, Jared and I wrote One Door Closes. Well, let me start by saying Jared and I met about 14 years ago in a business networking group. And it was one of those meetings where almost immediately we had a connection. And it was like we had known each other our whole lives. And Jared and I became running buddies, as you'll hear as I read from the book. And during those early morning runs, Jared and I would talk about our goals and our aspirations in life and the things that we wanted to do. And one morning I said, I've wanted to write a book for so long, but it's stuck in my head and I can't get it out. And Jared said, wait a minute, I want to write a book too. Why don't we write a book together? And everything flowed from there. So we came up with this concept of One Door Closes: Overcoming Adversity by Following Your Dreams during one of those runs. One Door Closes presents the inspiring stories of 16 people from all walks of life who have overcome what they thought were seemingly insurmountable obstacles in order to live into their dreams. And in the book, they share very candidly about the problems they faced, how they overcame those problems, the process they had to go through, and then the wisdom that they learned about themselves in the process. And we were very specific when we were writing One Door Closes that we wanted these stories to be in each person's own voice, because it's so important to have your story in your voice. And so Jared and I personally interviewed all of the people included in the book. We either interviewed them face-to-face, we recorded all the interviews, or some of the interviews, because they were people at a distance, we did via the phone. But we recorded everything. I transcribed all those notes. Jared proofread them. We sent them to each person to have them proofread their story. But because we wanted them to be in each person's own voice, we didn't do a lot of changing or editing. So as you're reading One Door Closes, you may see some things in there that are not grammatically correct, things that maybe don't necessarily follow a logical pattern, but that's the way the stories were told to us. The people included in One Door Closes are quite an eclectic group of people. Again, these are people from all walks of life. Many of them live right here in central Massachusetts. We have people included in the book like, and I'll raise this one up specifically because you were telling me earlier that you ran a shelter for women. One of the people profiled in the book is Annette Rafferty, the founder of Abby's House in Worcester, which was the first shelter for homeless women and children in central Massachusetts. Her story deals with the fact that at the time, Annette Rafferty was in the religious life. She was a nun. And she was told by the Catholic hierarchy at the time, you're just a woman. You can't accomplish these things. The men have to do it. Well, of course, as you know, the men weren't doing anything. She forged ahead, and now, 40 plus years later, Abby's House is thriving. It's the largest shelter for homeless women and children.
Just to make, last Sunday, I met the manager of Abby's place, who's retired now, but just to show you the connection.
Yes, thank you. And it's interesting the connections that we make through this. So Annette Rafferty is in the book. We have people in the book who had to deal with domestic abuse, who dealt with unemployment, who dealt with divorce, with bullying, and people who dealt with catastrophic illnesses. We have one man in the book who suffered a traumatic brain injury when he was hit while he was riding his bicycle. It was a hit and run accident. They never found the person who hit him. And he was given just a 25% chance of surviving his first night. And here he is, that his accident, I think, happened in 2009. Here he is all these years later, and he's thriving. We have a young woman who, at the age of 12, was diagnosed with femur cancer. And she tells her story of how, throughout her childhood, she went through surgery after surgery after surgery to insert artificial bones. And the bone, after a period of time, the bones would break. She would go. So she went through like 25 surgeries. She now is a practicing physician. She has a thriving medical practice in Connecticut. And 4 years ago, she made the decision to have that leg amputated because the bones kept breaking, and she had never been able to do the things in life that she wanted to do because she was always going through these medical procedures. She, as a child, she had never been able to ride a bike. She never went swimming. She now, with her artificial leg, is running triathlons and road races. So she has triumphed. So those are some of the examples of what I like to call ordinary people who have achieved the extraordinary. There are also 3 very special people that we include in One Door Closes, and they are all people that I have had connections with because I for a period of time I worked in the entertainment industry. So included in the book are June Monteiro. Now, June Monteiro in the 1960s was in a singing group called The Toys. The Toys' big hit was in 1965. It was a song called A Lover's Concerto that spent 6 weeks at #1. In One Door Closes, June goes into really very graphic detail about how after the hits stopped coming, after her career started to slow down, how her life spun out of control. She got involved with a very serious drug addiction. She overcame that, only to then, in 2006, be diagnosed with throat cancer, which for a singer is the most devastating diagnosis that you can get. She beat the throat cancer. She's back out performing with her group again. So hers is a very triumphant story. Also included is Scherrie Payne. Scherrie Payne was a member of the singing group The Supremes in the 1970s. Now, you would think that being the lead singer of The Supremes would give a person supreme confidence. Scherrie's story centers around the fact that when she was 9 years old, she entered a talent competition at school because she always wanted to sing. So she entered a talent competition. After her performance, she ran off the stage to her father and said, "How did I do, Daddy?" And Daddy said to her, "You didn't sound very good." And she came in second. from that point on, even at the height of her success with the Supremes, she never felt she was good enough. She always had doubts about her ability. She didn't think she deserved what she was getting. So she has had to struggle with issues of self-worth and very serious depression, including a couple of suicide attempts. The young Korey Mosier, and now Korey Verano, the young woman with the femur cancer, her story also, there's an element of suicide attempt in her story too, or thoughts of suicide in her story too. And then also included in the book is Mary Wilson from the Supremes. Now, I've known Mary Wilson, well, I knew because very sadly Mary Wilson passed a couple of years ago, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But I've known Mary Wilson since I was a 19-year-old college student in 1972. We had a very close friendship and relationship, and in fact, in the year 2000, she offered me a job working for her, and that was my dream come true. So I had this wonderful 6 years of working with this woman who I had grown up listening to and idolizing. So when Jared and I set out to write One Door Closes, Mary was the first person I contacted because I knew she had an amazing story to share. She had undergone so much adversity in her life, yet always kept going. She never let it get her down. She had to deal with being told at the height of her success as a member of the Supremes, being told by the head of the record company that she wasn't good enough to sing, that she wasn't good enough to sing lead, that her voice wasn't good enough. So she had to deal with that. She too had self-doubts about her abilities. She had to deal with her group falling apart and then having to begin to forge her own way. She had to deal with being in an abusive marriage for many years, and when the end of that marriage finally came, her husband, who had also been her manager, basically taking everything and her having to start all over again. She had to deal with, in 1994, her 14-year-old son dying in a car accident, and she was driving the car at the time. She herself almost died. So she has faced so much adversity, but has always bounced back from it. And so I knew that she had to be in the book. And when I called Mary and I said, I'm writing this book and I really want you to share your story. In typical Mary Wilson fashion, she said, everybody knows about the tragedies that I've experienced in my life. I want to do something different. I want to focus on my philosophy of life and how that philosophy helped me get through it. So actually what Mary ended up doing, she wrote the epilogue for One Door Closes. Hers is the final chapter of the book because it ties all those stories together. And so these are all stories of hope and healing. And I think that, as I reflect back now over the past 10 years, and especially over the past 4 or 5 years, in the midst of all that we have been through as a society over these past several years, we need to hear these stories and these messages of hope and healing and how we can make it through adversity if we believe in ourselves. So, those are the kinds of stories that are included in One Door Closes, and they really are very powerful, very dramatic stories. People always ask, well, how did you find all of these people? Well, a lot of the people in the book are people that Jared and I knew, and we knew they had amazing stories to share. But once we started going out and talking to people about what we were doing with this book, people started coming to us and saying, "You need to interview so-and-so." That's how we ended up with Annette Rafferty being featured in the book, because someone we knew said, "Annette has an amazing story to share. You have to have Annette in your book." So it was a combination of people we knew, and then people coming to us. And people still come to us and say, "Are you planning a One Door Closes Part 2? And yes, we are. After the One Door Closes related project is completed, we are going to start working on a sequel. And people are still coming to us and saying, if you're going to write a second book, you need to include this person in the book because they have a powerful story to share too. And again, I think it's, we need as much hope in our lives right now as we can get, and that's what these stories do. These stories give people hope. So One Door Closes came out in 2013. Now, Jared and I made the decision to write the book in 2011. And for 2 years, we talked about it, and we talked about it, and we talked about it, and we talked in circles and in circles, and we still want to write a book. We'll get to it, in a couple of months, because there's too much else going on right now. You know how it is. You always put off the things that you really should be doing because life gets in your way. Well, Jared and I were out for one of our early morning runs on New Year's Eve morning, so December 31st of 2012. And as we were running along, I said to Jared, if we are serious about writing this book, we need to commit to doing it, and we need to do it this next year. And this is the kind of person that Jared is. Out of his mouth comes, well, how about One Door Closes, Overcoming Adversity by Following Your Dreams for the title? I stopped dead in my tracks. That, to me, was the perfect title for the book, and it was like the key that unlocked everything that had been trapped in my head for so many years. And I think that's what was holding me back from really getting started on this book, because I didn't know what we should call it. I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't, but when Jared came up with that title, it was like the floodgates opened. And so we made the commitment, so starting in January of 2023. And we set a goal that we would have this book finished by the end of 2023. And as 2013, and everybody told us, you're crazy. You'll never be able to write a book in a year's time and get it out by the end of this year. Well, when you have a dream and it's important to you, you do what it takes. Now, writing One Door Closes was not without its own adversity, because early in our writing process, we actually thought we had found the perfect publisher. And it was a publisher based in Worcester, where we're located. She was very excited and very enthusiastic about the project. And so we were forging ahead, and about 3 months later, she backed out of our contract because she realized that this book was really more than she was able to take on. And so there we were. What are we going to do now? We're halfway through this book, and we've lost our publisher. Well, nothing ever happens by coincidence, as we were talking about before the program started. Someone in our business networking group who is a book indexer heard Jared and I talking about, because again, we talked to everybody about what we were doing and the problems we were encountering. That's the best way to get things done, is to let people know what you're doing and what you need. And so Jean, who is a book indexer, said, you need to contact Nancy Cleary at Wyatt Mackenzie Publishing out in Oregon. I've been working on some projects with her. I think she would be the perfect person to publish your book. So I called Nancy. And within 5 minutes of our telephone conversation, I knew that she was the right person to publish our book. And so things got back on track very quickly. We actually had the manuscript to Nancy by August of 2013. So we wrote this book in the span of 8 months and sent it off to Nancy. Nancy is the one who designed the cover for the book. I would never. I'm an artistic person, I'm a visual person, but I would never have been able to come up with a cover that so perfectly fits the theme of the book. So Nancy designed the cover for us. She guided us through the whole process. It was a wonderful relationship, and the book was published in October of 2013. And it has been nothing but up from there. And I feel so very blessed that 10 years later, I still get the opportunity to come out and do programs like this, to share with people, to get this message out. And I'm going to throw this in right at the moment. but I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later. One of the other things I said to Jared almost as soon as the book came out was, Jared, this book has more power and more potential than just the written word. I said, we need to turn this book into a documentary film. And that's exactly what's happening right now. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that documentary process in a few minutes. But that is what One Door Closes is about. That's how it came about. That's who was included in it. And I want to read to you a little bit from One Door Closes. Now, I said I'm also celebrating another anniversary this year, another 10th anniversary, because 2013 also was the year that I ran my first Boston Marathon. And as you know, 2013 also was the year of the marathon bombings. So it was a very interesting experience. I was 60 years old. Okay, and I can see your brains working now. You're sitting there saying, wait a minute, he ran the Boston Marathon 10 years ago. He was 6. Yes, I'm 70 years old now. And I'm still running. So let me read a little bit to you about the lead up to my running the Boston Marathon, how I got into running and how it has transformed my life. So this is my chapter. Well, actually, I have 2 chapters in the book. The first chapter and the next to the last chapter. But I figured, hey, it's my book. If I want to have 2 chapters, I'll have 2 chapters. But this chapter about my Boston Marathon experience was added late because we were already into the writing process when I ran the marathon. So this chapter is called I Can Do This. 2009 and 2010 were perhaps the darkest times of my life. During an 18-week period between November and March, we lost my father, my mother, and my mother-in-law. We lost my wife's father just a year before. So within the span of about just a little over a year, we lost all 4 of our parents. My father's death on November 4th came after a 4-month hospitalization, during which he lost sight in one eye, had a series of infections, and began a rapid descent into dementia, which ended in having to move him into a nursing home. We buried Dad on what would have been my parents' 62nd wedding anniversary. And even 10 years later, this story is still very emotional for me to share. So I can't guarantee that I won't tear up. Both of our mothers died with virtually no warning and no time to prepare ourselves. Barbara's mother was hospitalized for emergency surgery on November 16th when a massive tumor ruptured her bowel. She never regained consciousness following surgery and died on November 21st. Coming so soon after my father's death, our emotions were still raw, and this was like rubbing salt into them. That year, Barbara and I spent both Thanksgiving and Christmas apart, she needing to be with her brother in upstate New York, and me needing to be with my mother in southern New York. For 8 months, from August 2009 to early March 2010, I made almost weekly trips to New York, first helping my mother to attend to my father's medical needs and advocating for him when he was in the hospital and the nursing home. At one point, while Dad was hospitalized, I asked his primary care physician what Dad's prognosis was. Within earshot of Mom, he said, "He's old, he's sick, he's going to die. What more do you want to know?" Great bedside manner. All the while, I needed to keep my business running, plus I had a very lucrative consulting contract. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Then, without any warning, on March 16th, Mom was hospitalized. She hadn't been feeling well for a couple of weeks, and her doctor was treating her what he thought was a heart problem. It turns out that she had bacterial pneumonia, and by the time they caught it, the infection had already started to spread through her blood system, and she became septic. On March 20th, she was transferred to the ICU, and I received a phone call that I needed to get to New York and to the hospital as soon as possible. That afternoon, I spent several hours at Mom's bedside until her nurse suggested that I go home to get something to eat, and to my parents' house, actually, to get something to eat while they bathed Mom and got her ready for bed. When I left the hospital, Mom was in relatively good spirits. Less than 2 hours later, the hospital called to say that Mom had taken a turn for the worse and I needed to get back there immediately. By the time I got to the hospital, a 15-minute drive from my parents' house, she was in a coma. And she died at 11 p.m. Until 2 weeks before, she had been the healthiest of our 4 parents. We'd planned to bring her to Massachusetts to spend a week with us at Easter. And we planned to take her to Maine that summer, a place where she and Dad had loved to visit. And family friends were planning to take Mom to their timeshare in Hawaii because they knew that going to Hawaii was one of her dreams. To say that I was in a funk when I returned home after Mom's funeral is an understatement. I was in a place that was darker than any place I had ever been. My whole world had collapsed around me, and I was adrift. I continued my trips back and forth to New York for another couple of months to settle the estate, clean out my parents' house, and prepare it for sale. My physical and emotional exhaustion increased, and I knew I had to do something soon to pull myself out of this black hole. For about a year prior to all this family trauma, I'd been telling Jared that I needed to do something to combat the effects of aging. Those pounds that suddenly appeared during the holidays were not coming off as fast as they used to, and I was feeling a little sluggish. Jared, a lifelong runner, kept trying to get me to run with him, and I kept saying, "No, I'm not a runner. Can't do that. Maybe some other time." The real reason for my reluctance was that I didn't want to embarrass myself in front of my best friend. You see, growing up, I was about the least athletic kid you would ever want to see. I was bad at every sport, and I was bullied because of my lack of athletic ability. But Jared had planted the seed, and I knew I needed to do something because I was sinking deeper into darkness. I don't know what got into me, but in mid-April, I sucked up my fears and asked Jared if he would take me for a run. To say that I was intimidated is an understatement. To begin with, well, Jared's a lifelong runner. To begin with, he ran from his house to my house, which was about 5 miles. So yes, I was a little intimidated. And then he took me for a very gentle 2-mile run that day. There were a few little slight inclines, but it was a fairly gentle run. And he thought he was going to have to call the paramedics. I was wheezing and huffing and puffing and saying, "I can't do this. I can't do this." But I did make it back to my house on 2 feet, and that was the start of a new day for me and my climb out of darkness. And Jared kept taking me out, encouraging me to run just a little further each week. I still marvel at how incredibly patient he was and how incredibly good I felt after each of those runs. He got me to the point that I was ready to run my first 5K that September, just 5 months after that first pathetic 2-mile run. And I finished that 5K race in just over 24 minutes. I did it. This former wimpy kid had completed in his first ever athletic competition and did pretty well. I can do this. And that's when I started putting into practice what I preach to my coaching clients. If you can think it, you can do it. So running became a life lesson for me, a metaphor for my life. For decades, I told myself that I was no good at sports, couldn't compete, was a loser. And sure enough, I wasn't any good at sports because I told myself I wasn't any good. Yet here I was, just a few months after taking my first tentative run, competing in races. After that first September race, I entered a Thanksgiving Day race in Holden, where I live. And despite the fact that I tripped and fell, I picked myself up, kept running, and finished that 5K in just over 23 minutes. I'd shaved a full minute off of my previous time. That December, I ran what was called the Deep Fried Turkey 5K in Worcester, and I finished in the top 10. Now it was time to get serious. Time to employ Jack Canfield's minimum target outrageous system for achieving goals. My minimum goal was to run at least 3 days a week, and Jared held me accountable to that goal. My target goal was to run a 10K race, which I did on Cape Cod in February of 2011, finishing in just over 48 minutes. My outrageous goal? To run a half marathon. And in May 2011, I ran the Cherry Tree Half Marathon in Rhode Island. and crossed the finish line in just under 2 hours. It was 1 year and 3 weeks since I'd taken that first pathetic run, and here I was running a half marathon. A month later, I ran the Worcester half marathon. That October, I ran the Newport half marathon. 3 half marathons in less than a year. How's that for achieving an outrageous goal? I'd achieved my outrageous goal big time. Now what was I going to do? I needed a new goal. Oh no, not a marathon. Me? Run 26.2 miles? Can't do it, far beyond my ability. Jared convinced me otherwise, and in October of 2012, we took a road trip to Atlantic City to run the Atlantic City Marathon. Now, there was method to my madness in choosing Atlantic City for my first marathon. Atlantic City is flat. The marathon course is flat. If I was going to run 26.2 miles, it had to be flat. My goal was to finish in 5 hours. I crossed the finish line in 4 hours, 48 minutes. Shortly after returning home from Atlantic City, a friend approached me about running as a charity runner in the 2013 Boston Marathon as a fundraiser for a nonprofit he worked for. Me? Run the Boston Marathon? You know, the one with Heartbreak Hill at mile 20? They don't call it Heartbreak Hill for nothing, you know. Nope, I'll never be able to run the Boston Marathon. Thanks for asking, though. After a few weeks of thinking it over, I asked Jared if he thought I was capable of running the Boston Marathon. Of course you can run Boston, he said without a moment's hesitation. Jared had already accepted Ken's offer to join the Wake Up Narcolepsy team, so I got back in touch with Ken, only to find out that they had already filled their team and they didn't need any more runners. Fortunately, another friend who runs Boston every year told me about some other organizations that field charity teams to run the marathon, and the Boys and Girls Club of Newton invited me to join their Boston Marathon team. This was another milestone for me. At age 59, the first time I'd ever been asked to join an athletic team. And all I had to do to qualify was to train and agree to raise a minimum of $5,000. Wait, what? I'm not a fundraiser. How can I ask people to donate on behalf of my running? This was something entirely foreign to me, but I wanted to run the Boston Marathon, whatever it took to get there. So I threw myself into my training, and I became shameless about asking people for money, and asking again and again and again. And soon I discovered that people are willing to support you. All you have to do is ask. Someone donated $600 to support me. Another friend gave $500. Several more gave $100 each. Maybe they had more faith in my abilities than I did. But I soon discovered that I was inspiring people by what I had accomplished with my running in such a short period of time at my stage of life. And you see, that's all I ever wanted, to inspire people, to make a difference in someone's life. Who knew that my dream would come true in the form of athletic competition? We all know the tragedy that occurred at the finish line of the Boston Marathon on April 13th, 2013. For me, it was eerily similar to what had happened in New York City on 9/11. I was less than a mile from the finish line when I was prevented from running any further. I didn't know exactly what was happening. Panic set in when I learned that bombs had gone off at the finish line. My first concern was my wife, because I had scored a VIP pass for her to be sitting in the bleachers at the finish line. Was she there when the bombs went off? And I didn't know where Jared was in the race either. I knew he was ahead of me, but I didn't know how far ahead of me. Cell phone service had been blocked after the bombings, so I had no way to contact either one of them or anyone else. Fortunately, Barbara had been delayed in traffic and was about 10 minutes away from the finish line when the bombs went off. And Jared was less than 0.2 of a mile ahead of me when the bombs went off, so we were all safe. Despite the tragedy of that day, I have nothing but good memories of running the Boston Marathon. It was my best, most joyful race to date. My friend Rachel, who was watching the race from the top of Heartbreak Hill, told me that I had a huge smile on my face as I powered up that hill. And even though I didn't get to cross the finish line, I achieved something that day that I thought was far beyond my natural ability. Not only that, but according to Boston Athletic Association calculations, based on my running pace up to that point, when I was stopped, I was on target to shave about 5 minutes off of my Atlantic City Marathon time. I also witnessed so many glimmers of hope and healing in the hours following the marathon bombings. The runners who gathered around an older runner who was going into hypothermia to keep him warm. The residents along Massachusetts Avenue who came out of their homes to offer us blankets and water. The woman who, when she saw me standing in a storefront, wearing nothing but my running shorts, singlet, and running shoes as temperatures dipped into the 40s, bedraggled looking, caked in salt from sweating, and shivering while I waited to be reunited with my wife, offered me her jacket to keep warm. After the senseless tragedy of the bombings, it restored my faith in the goodness of humankind. Even better was the fact that not only did I achieve my fundraising goal for the Boys and Girls Club, I exceeded it. Thanks to the generous support of over 100 family, friends, and colleagues who believed in me, I raised $6,500. This helped me to achieve yet another life goal, to be a philanthropist, to be able to do something that makes a difference in the world, just by running. Running has transformed my life. It pulled me out of the depths of grief and despair. It brought me my best friend and business partner, Jared. Running has inspired me to push beyond my own self-imposed limits, to continually test those limits, to live my life with vision, courage, determination, and passion. And now my success with running has, I'm told, inspired and motivated others to reach beyond their own self-imposed limits, to live their lives with no limits. Running allowed me to prove to myself that I can do anything I set my mind to, no matter the obstacles. You never know where you'll find your inspiration and your passion. I am a runner. I am an athlete. I am, and I am going to be. You see, when you do things for love, anything can happen, and it has. As a direct result of One Door Closes, I now am in the 10th year of having my own radio show on WCUW 91.3 FM in Worcester, which was a childhood dream of mine. And the way that came about, in November of 2013, right after One Door Closes was published, I was at WCUW doing an interview on one of their talk shows. The interview was over. I was getting up to leave the studio, and just by coincidence, but again, nothing ever happens by coincidence. But by coincidence that day, the station director was running the controls in the studio. And so I'm getting up to leave, and he says, no, Tom, sit back down. How would you like to have your own radio show? And my mouth dropped open, and I looked at him and I said, I've only wanted my own radio show since I was 11 years old. He said, I need someone to take over the Wednesday morning time slot. Would you be interested? And I said, when can I start? And so that was in November of 2013. January 7th of 2014, I was behind the controls in the studio at WCUW, where I morphed into Motown Tom and host a show called the Motown Jukebox, which I've now been doing for the past 10 years. And so that is a dream come true, and that would never have happened had it not been for this book. Also, had it not been for One Door Closes, I never would have written my second book, Reflections of Love Supreme, Motown Through the Eyes of Fans. I've been a Motown fan since I was 11 years old. I am now a Motown historian. I learned a lot about it. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, I worked for Mary Wilson and for a number of the other Motown artists, so I got to learn the story from the inside out. Well, I started writing a book about Motown in 1983 when I was 30 years old. But in 1983, in fact, just recently, I found the original copyright that I got for that book when I applied for the copyright. But you see, back in 1983, when I was 30 years old, I didn't have confidence in my writing abilities. I didn't think that I had anything to add to the story. There were already so many books about Motown on the market. And so I took that idea and I took my copyright and I boxed it up and put it on a back shelf far, far away in the closet. Well, after One Door Closes, I realized, no, wait a minute. You do have writing ability. you do have a story to share. You do know how to put a story together. And again, that's when everything came together, because what I decided I could do with the story of Motown that was different from what everybody else had done. Through my years of working with Mary Wilson, I knew there were fans around the world who had these amazing collections of photographs that they had taken at concerts dating all the way back to the 60s that people had never seen before. And so I started contacting these people and saying, you know, would you be willing to loan me some photos from your collection? And so what Reflections of a Love Supreme is, it is the story of Motown told through the eyes and the camera lenses of the fans. And so it's like a small format coffee table book. It's a collection of 150 photographs that have never before been published, and I use those photographs to tell the story of how Motown became the music that inspired a generation in the 1960s. And then Reflections was named the Best Music History Book by both the National Indie Excellence Awards and by the Pinnacle Book Awards. So finally, I had the voice to tell that story that I had started to write 40 years before. Perhaps the biggest achievement with One Door Closes is, you know, I said earlier that I had told Jared that we needed to turn this book into a documentary film. And we started working on the One Door Closes documentary 7 years ago. I interviewed a number of prospective directors for the movie. I couldn't find anyone who shared our vision for what we wanted to do with this book, turning this book into a documentary film. And then one day my telephone rang. I picked it up, and on the other end this young woman says, "Hi, I'm Anna Walsh, and I'm a good friend of Korey Verano, who's in the book. Korey tells me you're working on a documentary. I want to make a documentary about Korey's story. Do you think we could work together on it?" And again, 5 minutes into the conversation, I knew Anna was the director I needed to work with. Now again, we ran into a lot of adversity along the way of turning One Door Closes, Overcoming Adversity by Following Your Dreams, into the documentary called One Door Closes, Korey's Courage. The biggest adversity we ran into, of course, was the pandemic, because we were in the middle of filming when the pandemic hit, and we had to shut down production for over a year. Although that shutdown gave us a chance to kind of reimagine what we wanted to do, and we kind of changed the entire format of the documentary. One Door Closes, Korey's Courage, the documentary, is going to feature the stories of 4 of the people in the book. Ken McDonald, who lives in Holden and is the man who suffered the traumatic brain injury. So he shares his story of his journey through that. June Monteiro, the singer from the Toys who had throat cancer, shares her story. Scherrie Payne from the Supremes shares her story. And then the centerpiece is Korey Verano, the young woman who had the femur cancer. And so she shares both the story of having to grow up with that, you know, and at age 12 being told she had cancer and thinking she was going to die, to that fateful decision 4 years ago to have her leg amputated, and all the wonderful things that have happened in her life since she made that decision, and how much fuller her life is. There was one other piece of adversity that we ran into with One Door Closes, because Mary Wilson was going to provide the narration for the film. That's something that I had asked her to do. But of course, we couldn't film her segments until we were done with everybody else's segments, because we needed to have that all done. Once things started opening up after the pandemic, in early February of 2021, I called Mary. Well, she and I had been talking about this for a while, but I called Mary and said, okay, you know, I think it's safe now for Anna and I to come out to Las Vegas to film your segment. And we were talking about that, and that was on February 4th of 2021. And I actually, that day, started putting together her contract for the documentary. And that her contract was sitting on my desk when early in the morning on February 8th of 2021, I got a call that Mary Wilson had died in her sleep that night. So we had lost her. You know, and what were we going to do now? Because she was going to provide the narration. And that was something that you know, for me, that was the heart and soul of the documentary. So we had to pick ourselves up from that and decided that really Jared and I are going to do the narration. And so the happy ending to the story, because there's always a happy ending, and these are stories of hope and healing. We filmed the final scenes for One Door Closes 3 weeks ago. Actually, 3 weeks ago today, we filmed the final scenes. And those final scenes were the narration and the connecting pieces. And then I'm doing a segment telling Mary Wilson's story, since she's not here to tell her own story. And the most exciting thing is that the documentary will have its premiere on October 8th in Worcester at the Hanover Theater. I just sealed that deal yesterday. So I've been neck deep in negotiating music licensing agreements, which is something I knew nothing about, but you know, there's very specific pieces of music that I wanted to use in the documentary. I've learned that when you're licensing music for use in a film, you need 2 and in some cases 3 separate licenses for each piece of music. But it has all come together. And so our plan after the premiere is then to take One Door Closes out onto the film festival circuit. And ultimately, I would really love to sell the documentary either to PBS or to one of the streaming services. And then there'll be that sequel to One Door Closes. So again, as I say, you never know where you'll find your inspiration. And when you do things for love, anything can happen, and it always does. But it does take persistence. It does take never giving up. There were a few times over the 7 years of filming the documentary that I was very close to giving up, but something would then always happen to renew my hope and to keep us going and going so that we've gotten to this point. So it has a happy ending, and I thank you very much for coming out today and for listening to me. I hope that I've inspired you, and you know, I think that we'll have a few minutes for questions if you have any questions, but I think I want to end the formal part of the program by saying that, you know, we do live right now in a world that needs to be healed. And I think each and every one of us has an opportunity to be a part of that healing, because it's going to happen one by one, person to person. I think that's a great part of what One Door Closes does. But you know, I think we each have the power within us to take some of the goodness that we have in our life and to share it with another person. And hopefully that person will share it, and then it will continue. And eventually we will heal the world. But it starts with each and every one of us right now. So thank you. Now, do you have any questions I can answer for you? And I do have copies of the book with me, and any sales today, I'm going to donate 10% to the Friends of the Library. But any questions that you have for me? Yes?
You mentioned that you're a coach. What kind of coaching do you do?
And
are you active still in that profession?
I am a success coach. What I really focus on now, it's interesting. I say that I'm semi-retired, although it doesn't feel like I'm semi-retired because I'm doing all these things. So I still keep my hand in a little bit. What I do primarily now is I run meditation coaching, meditation workshops, and kind of train people how to meditate and how to be mindful and how to use that mindful meditation as a way to achieve your goals. Actually, it's a program that Jared and I put together called Mental Massage. Jared's a massage therapist. And so during these workshops that we do, these meditation workshops that we do, Jared gives everybody in the room a relaxing neck and shoulder massage while he's massaging the participants. I'm leading them through a guided meditation experience to help you get back deep into your soul and to reconnect with things that maybe you forgot about that were important to you. So again, looking at what's important to me, what are my hopes and my dreams, what are my goals and my aspirations. So I do keep my hand in it. somewhat, but I mean, honestly, for the past 7 years, the documentary has been my primary focus. And then I also 2 days a week I take care of a 2-year-old, so that keeps me busy too. Yeah, it does. Absolutely, it does. Yes. Yes.
Who, when you mentioned the meditation,
Yes.
who do you refer to? I mean, what gave you the insight to meditate?
Well, you know, it's
Is it the internal, like looking at the body and saying, am I holding something here, or is it just a gentle?
It's a combination of both of those things, because I start out the meditations with having people go from feet up to head and just letting go of the tension, letting go whatever it is you are holding on to, and then once you get to that point, and it's interesting because when we're doing these workshops, of course everybody has their eyes closed. I'm the only one who can see what's happening. And, people come to the workshops and they're a little tense. They're not sure what to expect. For many people, it's something they've never had experience with. So people, their shoulders are up, they're tight, they're tense. As Jared's massaging their shoulders, and as I'm doing the essentially the body scan from feet to head, releasing the tension, and then going internally, I start to see these little grins show up on people's faces. So, and for me, it's a very organic process. I don't know that I can really identify that point in my life when I started seeing the benefits of meditation, but it's something that I do every day now, and it's that is how I've gotten from where I was 20 years ago to where I am now. And when I look back throughout my career, before I struck off on my own to take that job with Mary Wilson 23 years ago, I'd worked in higher education for 23 years. And when I look back at that, I was always in a role where I was helping and guiding people to achieve their goals. I was doing academic advising, I was doing career counseling, I was doing student services. So for me, it's just always been something that's been ingrained as a part of me. And then somehow I hit upon then meditation and mindfulness as a vehicle to take you to those places that you want to go, and to free your mind from those things that clog us and that roadblock us from getting to where we want to go. Yeah, I think that's a great question. Thank you. Yes.
You mentioned the darkness in your life, and I certainly understand what you went through. My family went through something very similar. But Jared, what drew him to this project? And does he have a chapter in the book? He
does have a chapter in the book, and Jared's chapter in the book is called Dreams Achieved Lead to More Dreams Dreamed. Jared has had a very interesting life too, and there's both a humorous answer to what drew him to this project and then a very serious answer. The humorous answer is Jared's story also deals with divorce and having gone through divorce. And so one of the reasons Jared wanted to write this book was because his ex-wife has talked about writing a book and he wanted to beat her to the punch. So that's the humorous side of why Jared wanted to write the book. But Jared's story is very interesting because Jared has 3 older children. He has since remarried and he has a little 8-year-old boy. And actually I took care of Owen for 7 years. I took care of Owen, Jared's son, from the time he was 3 months old until he started school. But when Jared's wife left him, she took all 3 kids and moved to San Diego and left him here in Holden by himself. So he had to make, he made a commitment that I think not very many men would be willing to make. He made a commitment that every month he flew to California for a weekend to be with his kids, to remain an active part of his kids' life. But his story is really about that devastation of divorce and the devastation of having his children taken away from him. Yeah. But the other part is, he wanted to beat Kristen to the punch in terms of getting a book published. Well, as happens so often, sadly, he didn't have a very good lawyer. His lawyer really kind of sold Jared down the river, and he basically lost everything. Lost his family, lost a lot of assets, but he's bounced back. He now has a thriving massage practice. When I first met Jared, he was a solo person working in a one massage studio office, or sometimes has a massage studio in his house, sometimes working out of there. Now he has a facility on West Boylston Street in Worcester. He has 10 employees. So, just in the past, and that actually is all since the book came out, that explosion happened.
Have been coming further west.
Well, you know what? Before he got so busy with his practice in Worcester, he did used to travel all over, sort of the central and a little bit western part of the state, because he would sometimes go to people's homes to do massage as well. Yeah.
You have to when you're starting.
Absolutely, yes. But for me, it's just it's been such an amazing partnership between the two of us, because it's like we are mirror opposites of each other. I'm very organized and very precise, and I like things done in an orderly way. And Jared's happy-go-lucky, and the way things happen are how they happen. So so I've kind of learned from him to let go a little bit and not to be quite so type A. But Jared has also learned from me that you can't just leave things to chance. When you're talking about things like this, you have to be, you have to have a plan in place. So we complement each other in that way. I can take care of the business things, and he is just the lighthearted, happy-go-lucky one.
How long have you known each other?
We met in 2009. Yeah, and we met in a business networking group, and. Yeah, and so after one of the business networking meetings, he and I went out to get coffee to know each other better, and by the end of that coffee, it was like we'd known each other our whole lives. We found out that we had a lot of the same aspirations, a lot of the same goals, a lot of the same desires in life. It really was like he was the younger brother I always wanted but never had. Yeah. So again, I'm thoroughly convinced that nothing ever happens by coincidence. And just as an example of that story, I was already in that business networking group when Jared joined. And the reason Jared joined that business networking group, and we met on Friday mornings, the reason he was able to join the business networking group is that he was doing massage at a local company in Worcester on Friday mornings. Well, in 2009, when the economy was tanking, that company cut out his massage position, and so all of a sudden he had Friday mornings available, and somebody said, "Oh, you ought to go to this business networking group and try to drum up business." And so, that's how we met again. It was just a coincidence, and just the way life played out that we came in contact with each other. But again, nothing ever happens by coincidence. We're always where we need to be when we need to be there. All right, thank you so much for coming. You're welcome. Thank you, Margaret, and thank you. Yes, this is one of my favorite places to come. It's just I love it here. It really is. Yes.